Good afternoon. Yeah. Dear guests and the participants, I'm Kevin. I'm the co-founder of Bear Rise Capital, also the chairman of the ABJ. Right now, I'm also the advisor to the ICC group. ABJ, I just gave some brief introduction about ABJ, the Asia Blockchain Gaming Alliance. We are a non-profit gaming alliance initiated by leading institutions in our industry. Today is my honor to serve as a moderator for this Fireside chat. We are pleased to have Mr. Yasu, the co-founder of the Animoca brand, the leading company in our industry. So, Mr. Su, welcome and thank you for joining us today. You can say hi to our audience. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. And you can just call me Yat. It's just easy.
Yat, okay. Yat, can you introduce the background of your company and describe Animoca brand right now, the investment philosophy, especially in our industry? You can say something. Yeah.
Sure. So Animoca Brands has been really building in the, I guess, what we call the open metaverse and sort of, I guess, GameFi and NFTs for almost 6 years now, which feels really long at this point in time. Yes. In our industry. But the investment philosophy that we think of, and by the way, we're builders as well, we don't just invest, is around what we describe as building the shared network. Right? So meaning that we don't believe, like in Web 2, for instance, in the traditional gaming business or in the traditional businesses in internet technology, everyone's trying to build a monopoly. Right? Everyone's trying to build a sort of zero-sum outcome, like, the biggest game that will beat the other game type of thing. But we think in Web 3, it works very differently. We think that the network is shared, which means that when you succeed as a GameFi project or any kind of project, it will grow the entire ecosystem as well, right? Because basically everything is within the same network. Liquidity is pooled, networks are pooled, players are pooled. In Web 3, it is not possible to have a true monopoly like in Web 2 because the network effects are all connected to each other. So how do you invest and how do you participate in an ecosystem where everything is shared? Well, if that's the case, then we have to invest in many things, in many infrastructure, as well as in many gaming projects, because they create these type of network effects. So today, Animoca has over 450 investments in the space, for instance, right? And some of them in our portfolio subsidiaries like Sandbox, or Axie Infinity, or Pixels, more on the metaverse gaming side, or like Polygon, or Aptos, or Flow, or like all sorts of chains we invested in, with the main purpose basically that it will help push basically the Web3 industry. And more importantly, I would say the other part of the investment philosophy is around ensuring that we have a future in which we have digital property rights, as in these are things that we can own. Because right now, in the technology landscape, in the internet landscape, you don't own anything. But in Web3, actually we can have full ownership. And what does a world look like when we actually own the internet, as it were, as opposed to today, where the internet is really owned by a few companies in the world?
Yes, it's not only for games, it's only for the ecosystem. So right now we build the infra, we also build the games. Yeah. As we know, the blockchain and the GameFi market are known for their volatility. It's the prices, I think, here swing up and down every day. So I want to ask Yat, how does Animoca manage the risk when you invest in the market and some new startups? Because it's very early, so it's high risk.
Okay, so first, straight to the point. So first, I would say the reason why gaming we think is so important for Web3 in the metaverse is because gaming, first, is the main thing that is an example of a digital-first utility that actually affects the physical world, right? And in fact, today we have 3.4 billion people who play games, and we have all these industries that have been created because of games, but it started virtually. So for instance, NVIDIA, which is probably one of the, maybe number one, number two company in the world with a $2 trillion market cap, would not have been the company it is if it wasn't for games. And we wouldn't be doing, for instance, mining or blockchain or those type of things if that didn't happen, right? We wouldn't have curved screens, there would be no PlayStation, there would be no Xbox. In fact, the App Store grew initially because of games, right? So gaming is one of those cultural utilities that starts virtual and then affects the physical. It's probably one of the only ones that does it. Everything else is physical to virtual, but gaming is virtual to physical. So that's the first point. Now, the second point to your, you asked a question about volatility. So I think our view on Web3 and blockchain is that it is generally not to be viewed as a technology only, but to be viewed really as a political system almost. right? It's a socioeconomic system. And what's the foundation of that socioeconomic system? It's capitalism, right? Web3 is defended through a capitalist framework, right? If you want to control Ethereum, you have to buy it, right?
Yes.
And if you buy more, it becomes expensive. It becomes a defense mechanism around it, right? So that is basically what Web3 is about. So if you agree that Web3 is a capitalist framework, then we have to accept that there will be some volatility. Because there is no, some people who criticize capitalism, they criticize it because it is volatile. But capitalism is a way in, it's a parallel to change. So we use capitalism as a way to create change and to understand change. If it wasn't for capitalism, there would be no Tesla. There would be no blockchain. There would be no Bitcoin. There would be no green energy. There would be no new innovations, no Google. None of those companies would exist if it wasn't for capitalism. And I often tell people, well, it's volatile. But I guess what I want to say is everything is volatile, right? So for instance, today we only, let's look at jobs in the market. When you look at an average of a market, you would say, oh, 3% unemployment, 5% unemployment. Seems pretty stable. But actually, it's not stable. How many people lose their jobs every day? And how many people get a new job every day? How many businesses close every day? And how many businesses open every day? And these are thousands and thousands and thousands. That is not stable, right? That is actually volatile. But in the traditional world, we don't see, right? We don't see the volatility. So we see only a number, and we think that's stable. But in blockchain, everything's on chain.
Yes.
So you can see everything that's happening in real time. Imagine if there was a public index that told you how many people lost their jobs every hour and how many people gained their jobs every hour. It would look like this, right? Right? And don't tell me the stock market is stable, right?
Yes.
Right? So I think the mechanism of how to manage a market like this is around being comfortable and understanding risk. And one of the reasons why you have rules around this is because, of course, because of the risk inherent, people have created regulations around that and trying to sort of understand that and having disclosures. So I think these are all important. But the point, I guess, what I want to say is that there won't be a capitalist future without some volatility.
Yeah, so we need to accept what will happen in the blockchain because we are just talking with the capital. Yeah. So could you share some insight on the trend or the developments in our GameFi space? Because I think Animoca, we just invest a lot of projects, but what do you think is the future and the trends for our industry?
So I think right now, the opportunity in Web3 is tremendous. I look at the Web3 and the metaverse kind of like a new country, right? Okay. In the sense that this is where there's opportunity. And gaming, I think, is going to be one of the biggest drivers of that change because it is the paradigm that most people understand. I just came, for instance, from, I was in Seoul last week, and I was talking to people, and it was interesting that more than half of the population under the age of 30 have basically digital assets, right? And it just kind of shows that it's the narrative of essentially the younger generation as well, because they understand, video game culture, whether it's virtual currency or virtual goods. They believe these are things that are important to them. It's part of their identity, right? For my parents' generation, or maybe even my generation, right, the physical world was important to us because that's how we made our connections. That was our value system. But actually, for many of the younger generation, how do we meet our friends? Where are our social networks? Who are connections? What do we care about? And we care mostly about what happens in the virtual plane and the reputation that we build in the virtual plane. And the other thing I would also add is that we talk a lot about social currency. And I don't mean currency as a token. I mean currency as in us as people, right? Our social currency is our reputation, our status, our friendships, our connections, right? And these are all happening online. And now what we have with Web3 and blockchain, we have a way in which this basically becomes enumerated. In fact, I would go as far as to say that money, traditional money, is a social network, right? It's probably the biggest social network today. The fact that I can use money to basically create a relationship, a transaction between a complete stranger or anywhere around the world, allows me to make a connection just because of the fact that you can do those money, and a token basically represents a similar relationship. So the trends that we see, therefore, is that yes, gaming will push it, but it's social networks and it's social experiences that will make people stay and create the groundswell of it, right? In gaming, we have a model where we look at what gamers do, right? Why they play a game. And so it's Bartle's model, right? And it shows that it's generally 4 categories. It's very simplified. You have the killers, right? The ones who love to basically be aggressive in the game. That's 1%. And then split into 20%, roughly 20%, is achievers and adventurers. So those are people who play the game because they love games. And the rest, almost 80%, they play because of social, right? And so, for instance, when you look at the biggest game in the world is Roblox. How many people play Roblox because it's the best looking game, right? Or because it has the best graphics?
Right, and some friends,
they play because of their friends. And that's actually 80% of why gamers play. So again, I go back to the fact that social is the ultimate root in this, but gaming is the experience layer that allows social to exist on it in a much more deeper way.
Yes. From what I know, in the last bull market, there were a lot of innovation in the Web3 game, which I think brought hope to everyone in our industry. But like such as you invest XC and some like other games, Steppen. However, we also found a lot of problems because last cycle, realizing that if we rely on the finance, it cannot sustain games. So in the bear market, most people we just discuss more about the playability about the game, not just for the finance. So in your view, what are the biggest challenges right now we're facing in our industry? How can investors and developers work together? How to overcome the problem?
So first, I mean, Axie is doing quite well right now, right? So it's come back up, and especially because on Ronin you also have Pixels and other sort of game projects and GameFi projects that have launched in it. But just to elaborate, the superpower of Web3 is the fact that it's built on-chain. And the more on-chain mechanics you have, the more network effects you can build. What's the most valuable thing we think in the world today? It's network effects, right? So for instance, when something has value, it's because people know it or people have appreciation or understanding. You know, the most powerful nations in the world have the most powerful network effects, right? For instance, I would argue that the US is powerful not because it has a big military. Yes, it has power, but its soft power is more powerful. It's powerful because of Hollywood, because of Facebook. It's culture, right? And culture is that ultimate network effect because they infect you with an idea. And when you have that idea, you don't forget it. So for instance, now when you have the idea of freedom, it's really important. Nobody will accept a world in which you can't have your freedom once you know what it's like, right? That's an example of a kind of powerful network effect because so many millions of people, actually billions of people in the world, agree that freedom or property rights or liberties are important, right? So that's an example. That's an example of that. So going into sort of the specific area of your question on gaming, what the lessons. So these network effects in Web3 have the ability through the token to have the utility, which is gaming, but also the financial networks combined, right? And in fact, I would argue that there can be no successful Web3 project if it doesn't leverage the financial network effects. Because we think of every Web3 project kind of like a mini nation. So Axie is a nation, Bitcoin is a nation, Ethereum is a nation, maybe Godzilla is a nation, right? And the point simply being that they're all communities. And so you can have lots of utility, you have lots of people, and you can be like North Korea, right? Yeah. Which has no financial network effects because it's controlled. No property rights, no capitalism. Or you can have a much smaller country like Switzerland, which is like 5 billion people, and has much more value because it has financial network effects that build utility on top. So the lesson I would say is you can't have one or the other, you have to have both. But in 2021, the majority was financial because of the history of crypto, right?
Yes.
And then during the bear market, you had more people come in for the utility. So eventually it gets balanced. But I would still argue that today, the market is still more heavily financial. So therefore, when you look at the value of token systems, the financial network effects still are more powerful than the utility network effects. But eventually in time, when we get to hundreds of millions of users, it will rebalance itself out. So that's kind of the state where we are right now.
So maybe in the future, these two sides may be balanced. But right now, financial is more important than utility.
But financial, it creates the incentive, right?
Incentive, yeah.
So for instance, I'm from the generation of Asian kids that used to want to move to America. But why did you move to America? We didn't move to America just because there was a nice beach or something, right? You moved there for economic opportunity. You moved there for opportunity, for hope, for potential prosperity, right? And it came because America had the deepest liquidity as a nation.
Yes,
right?
I know what you mean. Yeah,
yes.
Okay. Yeah, the last question is that I believe right now the mass adoption of blockchain requires good scenarios, and games are the biggest possible maybe we can find. If we're looking forward, how does Animoca Brands envision the evolution of the GameFi ecosystem?
So first, I think in Web3, gaming has a much more critical nature than in Web2, because it's a way in which we can teach financial literacy. It's a way in which we can actually create more inclusion in the financial systems in the world today. So one of the biggest problems we have in the current world is inequity, right? You have a very small percentage of the world that understands money and therefore has access to it. And the vast majority of the world does not understand money and therefore doesn't have access to it. And that's because even though we live in capitalist societies, the capital class is a small percentage versus the labor class, which is the majority. And it's a failing of our education because we haven't taught our children about the importance of financial literacy. Right? How do we learn? Well, we learn through play. And to me, gaming is the predominant form in which our young generations learn and play and interact, right? So if we can teach, our children know everything about Pokemon characters, they know everything about basically Roblox and that kind of stuff. So if we can teach them that, then we can certainly teach them basically around sort of understanding value and money and how economies work and so on. And that to me actually will create a different kind of paradigm in the world, right? So I think that's a really important role for GameFi. And that's why, it's not gaming. It's GameFi for a reason, right? But I don't mean it's GameFi just because it's games and finance. It's gaming that will also, to play GameFi well, you must understand finance, right?
Yeah. So GameFi not only for the finance. I think, as you mentioned, incentive is very important for the ecosystem.
And education.
Yes. We all think that GameFi has a very good future. We all excited about it. I think thank you for your today's sharing, Yat. And I also thank you for all the audience who joined us today. Let's continue this conversation and collaborations after our talk about it. Thank you very much.